Yeah. That looks like one.
Nice, very nice.
There we go, lovely. I can't even read my questions, but let's go.
Yeah, you can wing it.
So look, now your career has been a lot as a producer, and then you kind of, you've done directing of documentaries. What brought you to suddenly deciding on doing a narrative feature?
So I've been producing a lot of independent films, a lot of first-time directors as well as experienced directors. So I always knew I wanted to direct narrative stuff, but about, 15 years ago, I started working in the nonfiction world. I love to travel, and I thought, well, I was a little burned out of indie film in New York City, and I thought, what else do I love? Travel. If I could get paid to travel the world, that would be a pretty fun job. So I started doing that for a while, and then kind of during that same time, I made a couple of feature documentaries. But I always felt like starting in narrative and always thinking about story and arcs and characters really helped with the documentaries, and then I think the investigative work in a documentary probably helped with this type of film, especially because I was not at all into social media, so I knew very little about social media, and of course I knew about it, but I wasn't an expert in any way. So I really always wanted to direct a narrative, and I'd written something that I thought would be my first, but I've never gotten to that point where I thought it was quite ready. And so I love genre. I'm not just like a tourist in this world. I love it. I've loved it since I was a kid, and I definitely plan to not only do genre, but I plan to stay in it. So it was kind of a natural progression.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then what brought you to Danny Barker's screenplay and her involvement in this?
So a mentor of mine, a guy named John Gallagher, pretty well-known indie New York filmmaker, Danny had heard him speaking on a podcast about making indie films in New York City. She was looking for a director and a producer, and so she'd gone to him saying, oh, hey, do you want to direct my film? It's fully funded, and we start shooting in 6 weeks. And he was like, well, I can, I'm busy, but I think a woman should direct it, and so talked to Sylvia. And so she called me, and the words fully funded, shooting in 6 weeks did make me pay a little more attention, neither of which were true. But we do what we have to when you're making indie film. And I will say in her defense, she thought she could make the whole movie for $100K, which was almost our visual effects budget. So about a year later, we spent about 10 months, not full-time, but 10 months working on the script. The script I got, the core was there, the characters were there, the female protagonist, the male, that whole relationship was there, but we built in the very kind of meta, like the now, the live streaming, and some of the social media aspects to make it really current.
And is that what appealed to you in that way, that kind of immediate social media element to it, that was, quite zeitgeisty?
I think so. I think we all look for like the right now films. You hope you find something that's timely. But I love films, especially genre films that maybe have a little something to say. This felt a little bit like a cautionary tale about social media and something that could happen or could be happening already, or
Are we being watched?
Yes, but hopefully not to this extent.
Now, having been used to shooting documentaries, what was it like then suddenly having to work with actors? Did you, was there a lot of rehearsal? Did you allow improvisation?
Yeah, so I had started actually in theater. So I'm pretty comfortable working with actors. Theater is even, you're talking about beats and moments and arcs within scenes, and so it's almost harder to not, because in film nobody really wants to rehearse too much, and you keep it fresh. And so we had a couple of days of rehearsal, but that was almost more for, Luke, Danny, and I spent some time together. We read through the script a couple times and talked about moments or beats, and if there was lines or things that they were having troubles with, we kind of worked through those. And then I wanted to block it a little bit, because on an indie film you're always, I think time is every film's enemy, but I wanted to give our small camera grip electric department, I mean, we had the smallest crew I'd ever worked with. We had, you know, our grip electric department was 3 people total. You know, and then the camera department was as big as the grip electric department combined. And then, so, you know, I wanted to at least say, so here's the movements and the blocking, and I wanted to be collaborative with the leads and not just ram things down, you know, down their throats. And so, yeah, the rehearsal was short but good.
But now you were telling me earlier that Luke, you know, came to the set with his own kind of improvisation up his sleeve.
Yeah, well, Luke is, first off, brilliant and just genius at improvisation. And I, you know, even Danny, the writer, would say, I've heard her say, that the beauty with that is that he always kept her on her toes, because she never quite knew what was going to happen. If you know, and a lot of the best one-liners and zingers are just from his mind. And, you know, something that Luke and I had spoken about was that there has to be that shift, you know, once you come back and she's tied up, that to me the film would fall away if you didn't believe he was capable of going anywhere he had to go, that he could hurt her, that we had to see that he was really twisted. And so we didn't really let Danny in on that kind of conversation. And she really didn't, she thought it was going to be lighter and goofier and not as intense, so I think that definitely got her a little bit shocked.
Some genuine expressions of fear from her.
Yeah.
And tell me, the audition process, I mean, did you find Luke easy, or?
You know, our casting director, so, you know, one of the things that was probably the biggest kind of jumping off point for me was that it's scary when you're directing, especially your first narrative film, to be given a script and an actress to be the lead. Because I hadn't seen Danny's work. I went out and found every little bit I could find of her, but it wasn't a big body of work. So, you know, I talked to her, I felt we could work together. And she, of course, had to take the jump with me because I hadn't directed a narrative film. So I brought on a casting director in New York. I'd done many movies with Judy Henderson. And we did a couple of Hail Mary offers, which did not come through. And, you know, we might have been easier to sell the movie, but they wouldn't have been as good as Luke. And so she put it out to LA and New York, and we started getting a lot of auditions and a lot of, you know, agents saying maybe their name actor would be interested. And then Luke's audition came in. And from the minute we saw it, we all watched it individually. We were like, oh, I can't imagine anyone's going to top this, but we can't do it that quick. So then I gave him a couple of adjustments, you know, to come back to give us a little more time to kind of see what was happening with 1 or 2 offers we made. But it was pretty much his from the minute we saw it. And then, so that was really the big casting for the first chunk of filming. And then the tickle guy, and the cat, my cat. Mr. Sneakers. But so then, you know, the dad, Mark Moses, is a pretty well-known American actor. He's kind of like the supporting actor in a lot of things, Mad Men and some other movies. And then Ileana, the friend who plays Kai, her social media friend, is kind of an influencer. We knew we wanted to get, you know, a young 20s, someone who looked that part and could feel comfortable in that world and that kind of. Yeah, so we were lucky to find her. So we actually flew her in from LA, even though it's a small world.
Yeah.
And Luke, thankfully, was not living here. He was living in LA, so that would have made it easier.
Now, Australians are known for perfecting an American accent. Did you think of getting him to do an American accent? Or, I mean, I know Americans love the Australian accent.
Right, yeah. So the thing that we talked about with Luke is, so he's like, well, do you want me to do like the American Australian accent or the real Australian accent? I was like, no, we can do the little, you don't have to like add and make it bigger. And then he kind of shifts,
yeah, he does,
you know, to American, but also again, it's a very subtle American. He didn't want to like, he's not trying to pretend he's a Western cowboy, you know, he made it very subtle. So that's why she even says, wait, you're now pretending to be American? Because she's not quite sure. She's like, am I hearing properly?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting that, because it would have been hard because I don't have the ear for an Australian accent. You know, we would have needed a dialect coach or someone. Yeah.
Now, I want to reveal here to the audience we originally had Follow Her to be its world premiere last year at a night of horror. And it was all set to go, and then we had to go online because Delta was hitting hard, and it was just, and unfortunately we had to pull Follow Her from the program, but we stayed in touch, and here it is now. And I wanted to sort of, find out a little bit about when you started production, how affected you were by the pandemic, because so many productions have been. Right. Some have found it very hard, others have managed to do it successfully.
Yeah, so we had just finished filming, and a week or 10 days later everything shut down. So everyone got home, and then it was shut down. I was living in Florida, our editor was in LA, our visual effects team were in New York and Brooklyn, composer was in LA, so we were all kind of spread out all over, and then Luke and Danny was in Vancouver, Luke was in LA. So it was challenging because I was on Skype video share or Zoom with the editor every day. But I will say, because I was stuck at home with no other work and nothing to do, I could obsess over shots, and I had the 2 drives, so at times I'd be like, well, Alex, there's a moment where she has that line, there's actually another take, and I was, doing a lot of that stuff that I would never have had the time.
So it was a blessing.
It was. But the craziest thing was that Luke ended up in Australia, so when we had to do ADR, we literally had I think, did we have somebody, we needed somebody in New York, I'm trying to remember who, was it the dad? Maybe we needed the dad or something. But we needed to go to Vancouver and here in Sydney.
Yeah, right.
And everybody's name was Alex. On the post-production of the movie, our editor was Alex, our composer was Alex, the person in Sydney doing the ADR was Alex, and the one in Vancouver was Alex. It was insane. Yeah.
Wow. That's
nice.
Yeah. That's nice.
So it's the film of Alex, isn't it?
So the themes, and over the last 2 years, social media has played a huge role as we've dealt with the pandemic and been isolated, and, surveillance and control of surveillance just keeps getting more and more troublesome, personal privacy. What are your sort of thoughts? How prescient do you think the film is? Do you think it's becoming more prescient? Where do you see it go? Does it?
Yeah, there's a lot of social media films, I will say. That does worry us a little bit, But it is, I think people more than ever relied on social media to communicate, to have relationships continue when you couldn't see people in person. Even those of us that were never huge fans of social media maybe found ourselves on it a little bit more. So I do think that's very current, it does make it feel, and that, yeah, so I think the pandemic, if anything, has probably made it a little more right now, maybe, more timely. And the feeling of being isolated and maybe watched, we all felt more just being so isolated.
Certainly closes on you by the end of the film there, that's for sure. And now, directing a thriller, directing in the horror genre, you're getting a bit of a taste for it. Can we expect you maybe going even deeper into the horror kind of genre?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have, hopefully my next film, we'll see. It's never easy to get that launched. But it's called It Walks Among Us, and it's a monster film.
Creature feature?
Creature. Well, it's a hidden monster, but it's a physical being, a monster. Yeah, so, and it's a kind of an elevated, character-driven horror with two characters that are both very isolated, looking for how they fit in the world, and it just so happens that one of them is a monster. So it's kind of fun.
And black comedy, this has got a lovely streak of black comedy that runs through it. How important do you think horror films need a sense of humour, or don't need a sense of humour?
Yeah, I love it. I love having the humor in it to break it up, and when you have an actor again like Luke who can do it so well. Yeah, I would love to do another film like this where it's that not, the kind of uneasiness and the humor throughout. We are talking about, we'll have to see if this is successful, but a part two, Danny was always like, well, there's a sequel. I was like, no, it's actually a trilogy. Because there's a way that I see the way we could arc the story. So if that happens, we're going to co-write the next two parts. So we'll see.
Excellent. Well, look, I'd like to throw it over to the audience if there's any questions out there. Has anyone got anything they'd like to ask Sylvia? Do you need a mic back there? Maybe not.
No, I can chat.
Here we go.
Well, thanks for bringing that on. I just want to note that the directing was great, the fine line between the awkwardness and the meta and the power plays between the two. Very subtle, very balanced, well done. My question is more about the script. In the end, as you made that decision
Right.
between right and wrong, or regressing and not regressing, and doing the right thing and changing the normal arc, was there any pressure from anyone, feedback critics or editors, to go the other way, to go the right way, to change her decision when she was?
So did you interpret that she definitely chose to pick her friend? Or is that what you're talking about, that last minute, that it looks like she's not going to make the right choice?
Yeah, did I get it wrong?
No, I mean, it's open-ended, because I've had people think the opposite. Oh, she has to have
I
picked.
thought she did the wrong thing and kept going in her direction. Oh.
But what is the wrong thing? Is the wrong thing staying the star?
She sacrificed her friend to...
She sacrificed her friend.
I thought she could make a choice.
Well, you hear the
Well, there you go. I guess it was open.
Yeah.
there you go. Well, so if the trilogy happens, there's a lot of surprises.
She had an evil grin, like I didn't think she'd be grinning if she went the other way.
Yeah, and then she's like, I'm gonna take these up and on.
There you go. That was the direction I gave her, was, give a little,
Try and play them.
Yeah.
And she's gonna try and play them.
give a little screw you look without it being too obvious. Because not so much as she's suddenly become like an honorable person, but she's more like strong to say, well, F them, nobody gets, does this to me, but that was, we talked a lot about that, and how blatant, we had takes where it looked much more clear where she was really gonna try to get them, and we decided to leave it a much more kind of open-ended. Hopefully it wasn't frustrating, because I know some movies end and you're like, what?
Anyone else have a question? Glenn.
Hi, Sylvia.
Yes.
The idea of distribution in a piece like this, a lot of people making films, great films, and where do they find homes these days?
That's a tough one. That's a very tough one, especially, well, it's probably like this everywhere. We're not worried about it coming out. It's definitely going to come out it'll end up streaming and on demand and all that. Whether we see $1 from it is the question. In America, if you don't get into a couple of the, there's 2 or 3 huge festivals, Sundance, South by, and Tribeca, which we did not get into. So if you get into those, with those laurels, it makes it very, not easy, but it's almost enough. I mean, I know of films that have been sold without the distributor even seeing them, just because they got in. So then it's all the other films, and there's thousands of them, trying to rise above and get the attention, especially, I'm talking about the big American distributors, or even Netflix, Anoh, which a lot of these companies don't really outright buy films unless they're like the big darling at Sundance, but typically they make them from within. So then that means that, you're kind of with a smaller distributor who's, maybe selling it to Shudder or to Hulu, maybe not as an original. Not that we won't also try to maybe go to one of those as an original, but it's rising above the noise, because there's so much content. And I'm sure, I don't know if it's the same here in Australia, but I know all of, the filmmakers, sure you're also looking to how do I sell it in America and Canada and Europe, and yeah. So it's both good that it's gotten a lot easier to make films, but there's also so much content. And I think distributors are so busy, I don't know if they, you know, like I think our film suffers from someone watching it at their office and not really paying attention, you know, which a lot of films would suffer from that, not just ours, you know. You hope that someone, you know, but what we've lost is, you know, no distributor is probably ever gonna sit in one of these seats and watch the movie on a big screen with an audience, which is really too bad. It used to be that they would, and nowadays, if you're not in those couple of festivals, forget it, they just wanna send them the link, they're not really sitting.
It's great to see this on
Yeah.
the big screen, go so.
Yeah, it's fun to see movies on the big screen.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
I'd just like to know about, coming from documentary filmmaking, do you find that you have a slightly different eye to the creative process compared to directors who have mainly had the majority of their work at the start of their career as, for lack of a better term, fiction, and coming as a non-fiction director? Did you find that there were things that you probably thought outside the box that maybe other people didn't expect?
You know, probably. I know I drove Danny a bit insane with the writing, because I don't know about this, and I was even like, all those things, the comments on the side, nobody's paying attention, and we specifically went heavy in the beginning so that we could let him go, but I was like, well, you know, and we're like, oh, and then I should ask you guys, you know, nobody spells properly, and so we're like, well, what, are we just gonna look like we didn't proof them, but, you know, everyone, you know, makes spelling mistakes, and how do we make that look like we intended it to be that way? And
Grammar doesn't exist anymore now.
right, no, it doesn't. So, you know, part of it was like, well, how can we screw up some of these words? So it was, you know, that type of thing, maybe diving in, you know, because I remember she was like, oh my God, Sylvia, no one's gonna read those. And I was like, well, what if somebody stops on the, you know, and I was trying to, you know, have a couple of the same names, but when you had over 200 graphics, and that's not saying how many, I mean, 200 parts of the film that had graphics. So I was trying to pick, well, I want to see these 3 people come back 6 times while she's tied up. And so that was probably my documentary, you know, maybe my documentary background, trying to keep it real. And I think always thinking about, you know, when you do documentaries, you're not working with actors, so how do you keep it real or make sure that they're comfortable and they're not acting for the camera?
There were a few lovely shots as you kind of see that eye came through. I mean, obviously this is a very voyeuristic style that you're going through, and you kind of achieved a lot of that. And, you know, just stood out wonderfully.
Oh, great, well, thank you. Yeah, you know, maybe some of those, because I did a doc in Tanzania, and I remember talking with my 2 cameramen, who I didn't even meet until we were in Tanzania. We watched a couple films, and talked about them, and I would send them photos of some of the framing, you know, just because you want to set a scene quickly, you know, so you think a lot of, in documentaries, you have to rely, well, on images is so important for fiction as well, of course, but probably some of that maybe came from nonfiction, also because it's such a smaller crew, so I was so used to being right next to the cameraman, the DP, but I had a brilliant, my DP, Luke Eisbuehler, he comes from Doc World also. He does all of Sacha Baron Cohen's. While he was doing this, he was doing Borat too. Oh, we would hear the stories. He would have to dress like he was a Republican going to the conventions to try to get Trump. So he'd send us pictures with the little suit and the tie. And, yeah, so that's the type of guy. So, you know, we stole the subway shots. I mean, we could have been arrested, but he's been arrested with Sasha doing Borat. So, yeah, yeah.
We've probably got one more time for one more question. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you could comment on your choice to choose an Australian protagonist as one of the main protagonists, and especially your comment around, you know, the American-Australian accent as opposed to the Australian accent. I think, I don't know, in my mind, I'm a little bit protective when it comes to that aspect of this movie in particular, and I think it offers a lot of things, but I'm wondering what your take on it was for that particular role.
Okay. Well, so, it was more about making him romantic, about Americans love Australian accents. A lot of it was he was playing to her weakness. And he knew he was very good looking, and so, oh, I'll be this suave Australian guy. How could she say no? And you aren't really supposed to know, well, is he Australian, was he American? Was he an American, pretending to be Australian, but then pretending to be American? But it was really, we knew we wanted to give him a romantic, you know, make him a little bit more than just a good-looking guy. You know, when you hear an accent, I'm sure it's not the same with American accents, but in America, because our language is so like, but when you hear like the Australian or even the New Zealand or British, it feels, it's, so really it doesn't go much deeper than that, if I'm being real.
Exotic, you know.
Yes, exotic, right? Little did you all know.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much for being part of the
Thank you for
festival.
having me. Yeah,
Sylvia's
it's
actually
great.
hanging around for the duration of the festival.
Yeah.
Please give us a warm
10
hand.
days, if anyone has suggestions.
It's an absolute pleasure for having you here.
You guys are so lucky to have this great festival in your home.
It's
Like,
great to
I
be
wish
there.
that I had a cool festival like this, and thank you. It's
Pleasure.
been great.
Please come and see more films. You might even see Sylvia here because she's going to see a few, and she's very approachable, so you can even kind of ask her a few more questions if you like. We're going to head down the road to Kelly's on King. If you're not familiar with that, it's just this pub